Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Shuchandra Ghosh, Professor, Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. The subject today is Indian culture. The paper is Indian polity, and I will be discussing today with you on Mauryan polity. To understand the nature of the political organization of a vast empire like Maurya's, it is very important that we know about the administrative structure. And another learning objective is that the mode of governance of the different zones within the Mauryan Empire need to be studied properly because it was a vast empire. Now in this map you can see the vastness of the empire. It extended from in the northwest till the regions of Hindu Kush like Afghanistan, and there were regions like Taxila which was within the Mauryan Empire, and till the further south we have the regions of Karnataka which was within the Mauryan Empire. So this was a vast territory. So from the 4th century BC we find that Mauryas were ruling in the subcontinent. It accommodated diverse regions having varied ethnic groups, linguistic diversity with different socio-economic milieu. Naturally, it fitted well with the definition of an empire where diversity and pluralistic cultural pattern and multi-pronged linkages were the key words. And even though the Sanskrit term Samrajya used for empire is never mentioned in Ashokan inscriptions, and we find that Ashoka did not take tall titles like Maharaja, Maharajadhiraja. He calls himself Raja. That is in one of his edicts, the Bairat edict, which is also known as the Bhabru edict. He calls himself Raja Magadhe. The Mauryan imperial seat was at Pataliputra, which is the present Patna region. The acknowledgement and accommodation of the various linkages, the local element, is best seen in the issuance of Ashokan edicts in 3 languages. So we have Ashokan edicts in Prakrit, and apart from Prakrit, Ashokan edicts are also there in Greek and Aramaic in the regions of Afghanistan, and so therefore it shows the presence of the local variations. The fine spots of the Ashokan inscriptions, which you can see in this map, gives us an idea of the extent of the empire, and all this we have varieties of inscriptions, like we have the major rock edicts, we have the minor rock edicts, we have the pillar edicts. So these actually give us an idea where the regions which Ashoka ruled over. Now it is very important when we study Mauryan history, Mauryan polity, we have to look at the sources. And for the sources, our primary importance would be here in this case, the Megasthenes' Indica, Kautilya's Arthashastra, and Ashokan's inscriptions. Now let us start with Megasthenes' Indica. We have the Greek account of Megasthenes, who came to the court of Chandragupta Maurya as an envoy of the Seleucids. His account is based on his impressions about India, especially North India, during the reign of Chandragupta Maurya. He gives us a vivid account of the administration of the Mauryas. The next very important source is the Arthashastra of Kautilya, which provides a detailed account of how a kingdom should be governed. Some historians have attempted to demonstrate that there are parallels between the Arthashastra prescriptions, and it is a prescriptive text, prescriptions, and some of the descriptions of the Mauryan statecraft in the Greek accounts, and also of the Ashokan inscriptions. So there is a parity, some kind of comparability between the two. But the most important source that we can rely on for in general the study of the Mauryas are the Ashokan inscriptions. For example, if you can see here, this is the Lumbini pillar inscriptions at Ruminide, which talks about when Ashoka went there, that he talks about the birthplace of Buddha. Hida Buddha Jate is written here. You have a look at Ashokan pillar at Vaishali. Then you have the Aramaic. I have mentioned that Ashoka also inscribed in Aramaic. So this is the Pulidaranta Aramaic edict, and this is the famous Dholi edict. You all know that Dholi was the place where you have this the whole Kalingan war was fought, and so you have the representation of this edict here. Now, for the understanding of Mauryan polity, we have to understand the structure of the Mauryan kingdom. How was the Mauryan kingdom divided? The Mauryan Empire has been divided into three distinct zones. They are metropolitan, core and periphery. Before I go into the details of this, let me tell you that there was earlier a kind of an understanding that the Mauryan Empire was an extremely centralized monolithic empire with a very centralized administrative system. But researchers have shown that the diversity that we have in the Mauryan Empire does not allow us to go for such kind of centrality. So therefore, there are distinct differences in the regions through which the emperor actually controlled his empire. So Magadha was the metropolitan state, and naturally it was the heart of the empire. The Ganges plain was the part of the same system. Broadly, if we look at the Ashoka's distributions of the pillar inscriptions, we will find that all the pillar inscriptions were located in and around the metropolitan region, and it was the pivot on where the empire was actually controlling the income and the redistribution. Secondly, we have the core areas. Core areas are very important because they are not directly controlled, they are less directly controlled by the emperor, but they are more under the control of the governors and the senior officials. And these were incorporated in the SACE system, and these core areas were very important resource bearing zones. So keep in mind that they were providing the resources to the vast Mauryan Empire. So what are the regions? The regions are in the Raichur Doab region and southern Karnataka, which is very important, Gandhara in the northwest, Kalinga in the east and Saurashtra. Apart from the core, the metropolitan, the core, we have the peripheral areas, and these areas were areas of relative isolation, which means that they were not very much in direct contact with the central administration. So they were not a place of attraction, and so there were not much extensive settlements. These were controlled perhaps more by fiat than by direct administration, and generally these peripheries were forested areas providing a wealth of resources. Mauryan control over administration and revenue collection did not vary, but we have to remember that there was the variation in the mechanism at how to rule these three different zones. The distinct elements of fluidity and diversity in the Mauryan Empire as a contrastive category to the image of an imperial uniformity are further attested by the 7 Ashokan inscriptions that we find from Paktaxila and different parts of Afghanistan, and where we don't have the usual Brahmi, Kharoshti and written in Prakriti. So these were sometimes Aramaic inscriptions, which I already mentioned, and sometimes they were bilingual Greek and Aramaic inscriptions. So have a look at this Sharikona Greek inscription, that very and the letterings are very clear, very archaic, like modeled in a fashion that were written in Athens. Now, if we have to understand the structure, we have seen the structure. Now, how did the Mauryan rulers perform? So there was an administrative mechanism, and we shall delve with the administration now. The empire consisted of big administrative units or provinces, which could be divided into lesser units of different sizes. That the emperor himself strove to supervise the administration is eloquently described by Megasthenes, who wrote about the hectic daily schedule of Chandragupta Maurya, and perhaps Ashoka also followed this, and that we find in his inscriptions when he says that he clearly instructs his messengers, that they are called Pativedakas, that wherever he is, they must come and inform him even when he is in his inner chamber or in his pleasure garden. So one thing is very clear, that when we have the reference of Pativedakas, it means that there was a strong espionage system. We shall come to that later on. The Mauryan Empire had a very clear administration of justice. So Megasthenes notes that the Maurya king used to go out of his palace every day to supervise the administration of justice. As the Maurya ruler headed the administration of justice, it was possible for Ashoka to allow a reprieve of 3 days to a prisoner awarded capital punishment. And this we know from the Rock Edict 6. So Ashoka was allowing reprieve. So he had the capacity as a ruler to do so even when a ruler was undergoing capital punishment. And the metropolitan and the core areas of the Mauryan realm appear to have been brought under the direct control of the ruler. The administration revolved around a number of high-ranking of functionaries, and we learned that from the inscriptions itself that he had a term, we have a term in the inscription called Palisha, which is Parishad, and which means that it talks about his ministers and advisors who were advising him. We have a very interesting account of how an Amatya was selected in a Mauryan empire, particularly from the Arthashastra. This account can be seen. It is said that there was a peculiar type of test of deception that is called Upodha. The term used is Upodha, examining whether the applicant would fall prey to the vices of unrighteousness, fear, lust and greed of wealth. While the passing of any one of these tests, that is not being deceived, leads to the appointment of an Amatya in the related department, one successful in all the tests of deception, Sarva Upadha Shuddha, is considered a more qualified candidate and therefore should be made a minister, that is Mantri, with an annual salary of 48,000 panas. Remember that this was the highest salary that was being given in the Mauryan Empire. Thus, the appointment of a Amatya or a Mantrin rests on the candidate's ability to prove his purity, Suddha, in the tests of deception. From Ashokan inscriptions, we have a number of, we know about a number of officials, and for example, if we look at Pillar Edict 1, we come to know about the administrative officials known as Pulisha. They were divided into 3. So we have the high Pulisha, who is known as Ukashe, then we have the low, Gevaya and middle, that is Majhima ranks. And this corresponds to the Arthashastra ideal of classifying the officers of realm into 7 grades. The gradation being further underlined by the Kautilyan scheme of differentiate salary. As I mentioned that the 48,000 panas was the highest salary and the lowest salary was 720 panas per annum. While talking about Ashokan Dhamma or talking about his other achievements gives us an idea of the kind of officials that were present in the Mauryan realm. So the officials who are regularly mentioned in Ashokan inscriptions are the Mahamatras, and these are very important officials. They were also mentioned in Kautilya and they were of the following types. So let us look at the list of the Mahamatras. We have the Anta Mahamatra, that who is in charge of the Anta or frontier areas. Then we have a Itijhaka Mahamatra, that is 3 Adhyaksha Mahamatra in charge of women in general or in the inner chamber. Then Vachabhumika Mahamatra in charge of the Vrajabhumi or the pasture grounds. Then Nagala Vihalaka Mahamatra in charge of the judicial department in the city. Then Dhamma Mahamatra, who is in charge of the law of piety, specially created for the propagation of Dhamma. This post, but remember that this post was introduced by Ashoka. In Kautilya's Arthashastra, we do not have reference to Dhamma Mahamatras. They were very important officials because they were propagating Ashoka's Dhamma throughout his empire. The administrative divisions were, as I mentioned, that they were divided into provinces and each one under a prince or member of the royal family known as Kumara. So the governors were generally prince. So centers of provincial administration were located at Taxila, Ujjaini, Dhauli, Suvarnagiri and possibly Girnar, because from Girnar we have reference of the presence of Ashoka's governor. We will come to that later on. In Suvarnagiri, which is identified by D.C. Sharkar with Johanagiri in the Kurnool district of Andhra Pradesh, there was an Ayaputra or Aryaputra. And this Aryaputra was a Mauryan prince, and Suvarnagiri is generally regarded as the fourth and the southernmost headquarters of the empire. So it is very important that here in Suvarnagiri, and remember this was a very important resource bearing zone. So here we do not have an ordinary prince, we do not have a Kumara, we have an Aryaputra who was probably the prince designate or the eldest son of the emperor and closely can be equated with a Yuvaraja. His status was therefore surely higher than that of an ordinary Kumara, and hence a different level was devised to underline his highest rank and status. He could also hold a position of the viceroy directly representing the Mauryan ruler. So Aryaputras are very important. But then we have a different kind of references when we look at the Junagadh inscription, and this is the Girnar region in Saurashtra. Here we find that from the inscription of Rudradaman written in 150, he talks about the history of the Sudarshan lake, and he says that here actually the Sudarshan lake was excavated by Vaishya Pushyagupta during the time of Chandragupta Maurya. So the governor was Pushyagupta, he was a Rashtriya but he is not from the royal family. Then during the time of Ashoka, we have reference to the next governor, who is Yavanaraja Tushashva. So this Yavanaraja Tushashva, it says that Yavana is Greek, but what we find is that both the governors were outside to the royal house. Tushashva is commonly seen as a Greek on the ground of his epithet Yavanaraja, but he is not a Greek. If you look at the name, it is an Iranian name. Asfa or Aspa is the Iranian equivalent of Sanskrit Ashra. So therefore Tushashva was a person of the Iranian origin. The thing is that the Yavanas, who were generally known as Hellenized person or the Greeks, Ionian Greeks, at one point of time the connotation changed, and therefore any foreigner and a person who was of West Asiatic influence was Hellenized was known as a Yavana. The significant point is that in the Kathiawar region, the Mauryas consistently appointed governors who were not from the local or not from the royal lineage. So here we have to look at the provincial administration. So the provincials were perhaps divided into different administrative units like Janapada, which is a large sub-province, and Ahara mentioned in the Ashokan edicts. In Rock Edict 3, three classes of officials are mentioned who posted throughout the empire were enjoined to go on tours of inspection every 5 years. These persons are Yutas, that is Yuktas, Rajukas and Padesikas or Pradeshikas. The Yutas were actually when we look at they were looking at the king's orders by messages formulated the Palisha, and therefore were sent off from the capital. They moved around in different regions of the empire. Both the Rajukas and Pradeshikas seem to have been officers posted in the provinces. In Minor Rock Edict 2, that is there are many minor rock edicts, but in Yeragudi we find the Rajuka is expected to instruct the people of a Janapada under him in the principles of Dhamma. And here remember that we have reference to Rajuka in the Arthashastra, but in the Ashokan inscriptions the Rajukas have been given much more prominence and their power were increased. So they had a lot of power in their hands, and therefore for the propagation of Dhamma, they were also, apart from the Dhamma Mahamatras, they were also used by the emperor. From Pillar Edict 4, we also learn that the Rajukas exercised extensive powers to judge and punish those whom they ruled over. So the administration of justice was also under the hands of the Rajukas. There's a very interesting comparison between the Rajuka and the agronomoi of Megasthenes. As I mentioned earlier also, the Rajukas of Ashoka could have also functioned as an officer measuring land in rural areas in addition to their discharging other important functions at the locality level. So, one, we have Rajukas as administering justice. We have Rajukas sent to places where the people to see whether people were adhering to the Dhamma, and then we have also Rajukas in rural areas where measuring land. Megasthenes labeled officers in charge of the countryside as agronomoi, who were entrusted with, among other things, collection of revenue, supervision of irrigational facilities, judicial administration, and maintenance of roads. So these are the functions of an agronomoi. And now if we look at the functions of the Rajuka, then we can find that there are some kind of comparability or some kind of similarity. Therefore, scholars tend to identify the agronomoi group of officers of Megasthenes with the Rajukas of Ashokan inscriptions. Ashoka seems to have increased the importance and responsibilities of the Rajukas, and that's why they were also associated with the propagation of Dhamma. And remember, Ashoka's Dhamma was not a religion, it was a political philosophy. It dealt with law of piety, but Ashoka was using his Dhamma as a cementing factor for the larger unification of his empire. From this, we move to the urban and rural administration. The largest unit of rural administration is Sthaniya, which consists of 800 villages. It has two subunits in descending order, namely the Dronamukha, which has 400 villages, and the Karvatika, which has 200 villages. So the Dronamukha and the Karvatika, they were actually in relation to each other. And at the lowest rank stood the Shangrahana, which consisted of 10 villages. So naturally the villages were the lowest unit of rural administration. And we have a detailed description in Kautilya's Arthashastra, which talks about this, the kind of rural administration that an emperor should actually entrust upon the governors of the rulers of those places. Then we come to the urban administration, when there was a city superintendent who maintained law and order and the general cleanliness of the city. He was also associated by an accountant and a tax collector. Now, Megasthenes gives us a very interesting account of Pataliputra's administration and about the city of Pataliputra, and states that the city was administered by 30 officials known as astynomoi, divided into 6 committees of 5 members. Just remember that Pataliputra became a very important center of Magadha. It was the capital of Magadha. But earlier, during the time of Buddha, it was known as Pataligama. And it was Buddha, Lord Buddha, who came and stood in Pataligama, and he foresaid, he said that one day this Pataligama will be an urban center. And his predictions came true when Pataliputra turned onto an important urban center. So now coming to these boards, we find that the first board looked after everything concerning industrial arts. The second board was entrusted with information on births and deaths occurring in the city. So this is a very unique phenomenon, which means that there were registers. The emperor was keeping an eye on the list of births and deaths, on the population, on the demography. So this is a very important facet of the Mauryan Empire. Thirdly, we find that the Greek account informs us that this helped the administration to assess the amount of taxes to be levied from the city dwellers. So when you have the list of the birth and death, you have the entire demographic picture. So the emperor or the authorities, the apex political authority, knows that how many persons are there, and so it is easier to levy taxes. Taxation was a very important part of a larger empire like the Mauryas. The third board took care of the foreigners visiting the Mauryan capital. This is also part of the entire surveillance procedure of the espionage system of the Mauryan Empire. So whoever is coming from abroad, from outside in the Mauryan Empire was being tapped. So people, the emperor, the authorities, the administration knew that if there were certain persons coming from outside, this could stop any kind of a problem in the empire. The fourth board supervised exchange related activities, which means it talks about the trade related activities, the kind of an exchange between the goods that were looked after by the fourth board. The fifth board ensured that no old article would be mixed with the new one, that is looking at the purity of the foods and other kind of objects. The sixth board was entrusted with the collection of 1/10 of the sale proceeds. Herein comes in the importance of again revenue collection, that the boards were given that kind of power to look after the sale proceeds. Have a look at Kumrahar. Kumrahar is within Pataliputra, and this is said to be the original center of power in Pataliputra. Excavations were done in Kumrahar, and now if you go there, you will find the remains there. A very important part of an empire is armed forces. So the Greek text suggests that the administration of the army was assigned to 6 boards. We need to have a very strong army to keep tab of the vast empire. So there was, according to the Megasthenes' account, there were 6 boards which consisted of 5 members, total of 30 members. These were, what are these? These were officials that concerning the navy, and we have a comparison with the Arthashastra. So we have concerning the navy in Arthashastra we have Navadhyaksha, then concerning the supply of provisions for the army with the help of bullock carts, then we have perhaps the Goadhyaksha that we have in Arthashastra in charge of, third is in charge of infantry, that is the Patyadhaksha of the Arthashastra, in charge of the cavalry, that is the Ashyadhaksha of the Arthashastra. Cavalry is a very important part of the entire armed forces. Then in charge of the chariots. Chariots were used largely in warfare, so we have the Rathadhyaksha of the Arthashastra, then in charge of the elephant corps, that is the Hastyadhaksha of the Arthashastra. Elephant formed a very important part of the Mauryan army, and you know that when after the defeat of Seleucus, he asked from Chandragupta 500 elephants. So these were very important war forces for any kind of a kingdom or an empire. Now from Megasthenes' account, if we move to Arthashastra, the way Megasthenes has given us the different varieties, Arthashastra talks about this kind of officers, but it doesn't talks about the collective descriptions. It talks only of individual superintendents for managing the various departments of the army, and it has no reference to the committees at all. We have also no information on the command structure of the army. The Arthashastra mentions that the Senapati, as the commander of the army, he was one of the 4 highest paid functionaries, drawing an annual salary of 48,000 panas. We have earlier seen that a mantri and amatta, they were also drawing 48,000 of panas. We know about Pushyamitra Shunga, and who was actually the last Senapati of the Mauryan Empire, and he killed the last Mauryan ruler Brihadratha. So Senapati was an important officer of the Mauryan realm. Now from army we come to the espionage system, and this was for the Mauryans or for the Mauryan administration. This was a very primary official activity. The Arthashastra gives us a vivid account of the surveillance. It advocates the frequent use of spies and recommends that they should work in the guise of recluses, householders, merchants, ascetics, students, mendicant women and prostitutes. So these are the categories of people who were actually taking the guise of this and moving into people's houses, into areas, different areas for spying. We also have reference to a category called Vishkanya, poison woman, who were very important for the kingdom or for the empire, and who used to go to different rulers' places and had some access on these regions. The classical texts speak of the overseers, inspectors and spies, episcopi or iphor, these are the terms used, who are praised as the most reliable people in the realm. The most elaborate prescription of setting up of a secret service, as I mentioned, is available in the Arthashastra, and Arthashastra uses the term Gurha Purusha for secret service. So secret agents, according to this text, are of two types. One is stationary, that is Shangstha, who actually are employed in some places, and then we have the roving, that is Sancharo, that were moving around the entire empire, and they were divided into 9 subtypes. Kautilya proposes the utilization of a spy on the simultaneous payroll of, this is very important, of 2 kings, and it calls Uvaya Betana. So one single person will be acting as a spy of one ruler, and then he will also take up a job of spying in the kingdom of another ruler. So he is like a modern day double agent. So that is very interesting that we find the prescription in Kautilya's Arthashastra. The head of the secret service in the Arthashastra is the Samaharta, primarily entrusted with the collection of revenue. Kautilya advocates an elaborate network of espionage in which information gathered by the roving, that is the Sanchara agents, should be routed through the stationary spies, the Sangstha, to the head of the secret service. But what is interesting is that even the head of the secret service, that is the Samaharta, he is also being under surveillance. So the king or the emperor is keeping tab on all the officials and even on the director of the spies. So this is Kautilyan's stress on gathering of secret information on the activities and attitudes of the high-ranking officials. No one is spared, and therefore there is an invigilation upon the suspect elements of the state, and the application of force, fraud and dubious means to eliminate them was always there. If we now go back and recapitulate that what was kind of a polity was the Mauryan polity, we find that the administration pattern shows us that it was a very organized polity. The Ashokan edicts make it evident that the empire was not viewed as consisting of uniform units of administration, and they acknowledge the presence of diverse peoples. There were many kinds of people, and we'll always remember that for an empire it has to be a multi-ethnic region where people from various places are coming and staying, different kinds of cultures. So this happened, this we find reflected in Ashoka's inscriptions. The distinct elements of fluidity and diversity in the Mauryan Empire as a contrastive category to the image of the imperial uniformity are also attested upon, as I mentioned earlier, by the 7 Ashokan edicts written in Greek and Aramaic, and these are placed in regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Public works is also an important aspect of Ashoka's administration, and it covered a wide range of activity. The king had overall control, so their control was exercised by the imperial administration, but there was a recognition of the local. So therefore, since there was a recognition of the local, we find that the metropolitan area is directly under the rule of the ruler. Then we have the governors as the princes, as Kumaras. Then again, in case of Saurashtra, we found that it was not the princes, but it was the local officers who were in charge of Saurashtra. And we have this kind of Mahamatras where they were being given actually advices or sometimes instructions by the ruler to carry on orders, and these are extensively found in Ashoka's inscriptions. The king's statement to the forest dwellers was conciliatory, but at the same time there was the threat that the state could be severe, and this comes with the thing that in Ashoka's inscriptions we have reference to the Atavikas. Atavikas are forest people, and Arthashastra also says that they were very dangerous, but they could be used profitably by the crown. Now Ashoka treated them in the beginning in a conciliatory manner, but he made it very clear that if the Atavikas are not listening to him, then he would be forced to take upon severe acts. So therefore, even there is fluidity, we have a kind of a control that was done by the emperor. So Mauryan control over administration and revenue collection did not vary. There were various mechanisms and forms in this control. So we cannot say that it is an entirely centralized administration, but there were different kinds of mechanisms through which the Mauryan emperor had control over his entire area, even though he always accommodated the regional and the local, and so the regional and the local was not wiped out. In here again comes that his use of Greek and Aramaic. So when he is issuing an edict in Kandahar, which was actually populated by the Greeks, we have later instances where Isidore of Karak says, Esti de Hellenes, this is Greek on Kandahar. So naturally, to make people understand what Ashoka wanted to say, he issued his inscription, his edicts written in Greek. On other areas where Aramaic was prevalent, he used Greek. But for the entire subcontinent, it was generally Kharoshti in the northwest, Brahmi, and the language was Prakrit, though there were variations, there were different recensions, and this shows that there were coexistence of diversity, and there were various kind of administrative handling. The communication between the province and the center was difficult given the distance between the Pataliputra and other areas. So naturally, local and regional powers had to be given some kind of power. Ashoka's edicts do not give us an idea of an image of a monolithic political structure. This is very clear if we go through the Ashokan inscriptions. Therefore, the direct authority of the apex Mauryan, or direct control of the apex Mauryan authority, was mostly felt in the metropolitan and to some extent in the core, whereas the periphery was outside the purview of the direct control. Thus, the Mauryan Empire suggests that it was a kind of a polity where control was there, but there were also accommodation of the regional and the local. Thank you.